Okay,
It's
thanks
official.
everybody for joining us. We're going to get started here. I'm Tamara Coffey with the Kentucky Arts Council. We're happy to see everybody. Um, and I think we've got a really good webinar for you this afternoon. I hope you find a lot of useful information. I know you will. Just a few things before we get started. This is a part of our Creative Industry Summit series. We've done 4 or 5 already, and those are all on the Arts Council's YouTube channel. We have a few more coming up. We have 2 arts education webinars coming up, one on March 27th at 5 called Arts Education and Accessibility, and another on April 3rd at 5, Implementing New Art Standards. And for all of our artists and creatives on April the 2nd at 2, we have a session on taxes for Kentucky artists and creatives. And we hope you'll sign up for that and check out that webinar. It's going to be very good. We also have coming up in April on the 24th, our Kentucky Writers' Day event that's going to be here in Frankfurt, and we'll be bringing in a brand new poet laureate for 25-26. We can't announce who it is yet, but it's going to be very exciting. We hope you will join us for that as well. And finally, we're going to have a Derby exhibit call for artists coming up. I know, Dave, you're on here. Do you want to say anything about that? Dave's not talking to me. Okay. Just keep an eye out. If you don't get the Kentucky Arts Council web letter or e-newsletter, rather, please sign up for that. You can do that by going to the Arts Council website at artscouncil.ky.gov and clicking on the button to subscribe. So let's get started. So much great information today. 2 really great speakers. Mollie Quinlan-Hayes is our primary speaker. Mollie she works primarily with 2 institutions committed to the readiness and recovery of artists and arts organizations in crisis. For NCAPER, the National Coalition for Arts Preparedness and Emergency Responses, she serves as the Fund Development and Program Officer. This arm of her work addresses both policy and practice to build resiliency in the national arts sector. For the New York Foundation for the Arts, or NYFA, or NIFA, she coordinates their Rauschenberg emergency grants for individual artists to support them in returning to their creative practice. Working out of Atlanta, Georgia, she also consults widely for arts organizations throughout the United States on strategic planning, organizational development, readiness planning, grant making, and program design, as well as serving as a skilled facilitator in diverse settings. Recent projects include redevelopment of the Folk and Traditional Arts Program for the Georgia Council for the Arts and teaming on a new strategic plan for the Santa Cruz County Museum of Discovery. While serving as Deputy Director and Accessibility Coordinator for South Arts, Mollie designed and guided programs including Arts Ready, following the 2005 hurricanes Katrina and Rita, the South Arts Fellowships and Southern Prize, Jazz Road, and the Dance Touring Initiative. She played a lead role in partnerships including the Southern Region Creative Placemaking Leadership Summit and Arts Education Research in the South. Prior to joining South Arts, Mollie was the Assistant Director and Accessibility Coordinator of the Arizona Commission on the Arts. She is a graduate of the inaugural class of Executive in Arts and Culture Strategy program from the University of Pennsylvania National Arts Strategies. Welcome, Mollie. We're glad you're here.
Thank you so much, Tamara. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And as Tamara noted in that kind of lengthy introduction, I was with South Arts prior to moving over to NCAPER and have worked with the Kentucky Arts Council for many years. I'm a great fan of the team there and the work that you do, so it was really a pleasure to get the call inviting me to be part of this webinar series. I will also say that when we started planning this agenda, Tamara and I back in October, and decided to title it "How to Get Ready for Anything," That was maybe a little bit aspirational given the state of affairs today. But we're going to cover as much as we can and welcome your questions. Please feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll have time at the end for Q&A. What we're going to cover in the hour that we have together today is, certainly before we get into the content of preparedness, we wanted to spend a couple of minutes just recognizing what is going on in Kentucky right now and offer some current response resources if you have been impacted by current natural disaster events. And then we're really lucky to have Doug Naselroad on the line with us today to do a short report from the field and share some of his perspective in having gone through two kind of devastating events over the last 2.5 or 3 years, and what some lessons he's learned from that. Then we're actually going to dig into readiness planning for artists and creatives. Why do it? What is it? And how to do it. And then we'll have plenty of time for discussion, and I'll leave you with some resources that you can use to follow up with. Before we jump into that, I also just want to thank you for being here. As one of my colleagues says about readiness planning, it manages to be kind of scary and boring at the same time. But the fact that you are here taking an hour out of your day to talk about it, I think speaks well of your commitment to your practice, and wanting to make sure that you and your work are there to serve the rest of us in the future. So a couple of just current response resources for you. If you have been in one of the, I think it's now 16 counties that have received a federal disaster declaration, please make sure that you register for individual assistance at disaster.gov. There is a deadline. If you end up not being eligible, or you decide not to accept what might be offered to you, that is a separate thing. But if you don't apply before the deadline, you will not be able to receive any assistance. So we just recommend that everyone at least register and get into the system. Just got a press release yesterday from Tamara that there has been also an expansion in the accessibility of disaster unemployment assistance. If you're in an impacted area, that has a registration deadline of April 25th. So here's the website or the number to call and register for that. KERN, the Kentucky Heritage Emergency Response Network, is a wonderful coalition that formally banded together and launched last September. I was happy to be at a summit launching that event in Louisville. We are doing regular response calls. We had one today, and our next one will be 2 weeks from today. I'm sorry, 3 weeks from today. So if you would like to be part of those calls where we just share status and resources, you can certainly reach out to us at ncaper.org or khern.org, and we can get you on that list. Also, Kern and our partners at Performing Arts Readiness are holding a free full-day disaster preparedness workshop for arts and culture in Paducah. We'll make sure that that link gets to you in case you're interested in registering for that and bringing any colleagues or team members. We also have rapid impact assessment surveys that we have started collecting after any event of any scale across the country. There's one for artists and performing groups, one for performing arts organizations, and a third that is managed by our colleagues at FAIC. I see Christy's on the line today, for cultural institutions. And what these do is provide those of us who work in kind of the policy and service sector a snapshot of what is going on, so that we can not only guide you to resources, but also communicate back to public officials and policymakers and first responders, well, maybe second responders, what the impact is on the arts and culture sector, so that we're not overlooked in the response and recovery portion. Also, for those of you who are artists, I did want to note that as of last March, just about a year ago now, if you are an individual self-employed artist or other self-employed individual, and you have lost or had damage to your tools and equipment, necessary to do your artwork or craft as in a federally declared disaster, you can now request FEMA individual assistance to replace those. So that is new. Not many people know about it. Even the FEMA people on the ground don't necessarily know about it. So I'm not going to go into detail here. There's information on the NCAPER website, but we want to make sure that you have access to any and all resources that you are available to you. So now I'm really pleased to introduce an esteemed colleague from Kentucky. Master luthier Doug Naselroad joined Heineman's Appalachian Artisan Center to found the Appalachian School of Luthery in 2012. And in 2016, the school's Heineman Dulcimer Project won the prestigious Governor's Award in the Arts for Folk Heritage. Recipient of the 2017 Homer Ledford Award, which is presented annually by the Kentucky Folklife Program to a Kentucky luthier who demonstrates outstanding craftsmanship and is celebrated by the communities of musicians they serve. Doug was named a South Arts Fellow in 2019 and co-authored the Culture of Recovery, or COR program, funded by Art Place America. Once a month, he hosts the Not Downtown Radio Hour on Appleshop's WMMT FM 88.6, and he currently serves as director of the Troublesome Creek Stringed Instrument Center at the Appalachian Artisan Center in Heineman, a nonprofit manufacturing company that employs people in recovery. His facility was impacted in 2022 by a 1,000-year flood. They did an amazing job of recovery and rebuilding and immediately returned to serving their community. And unfortunately, were impacted again just about a month ago by the floods. So I'm going to ask Doug to just quickly, as I show a couple of images, talk briefly about what happened in 2022 and then what happened again just last month, and then ask him a couple of questions about that experience. So Doug, do you mind telling us briefly what happened during the floods of 2022?
Well, we had a beautiful factory that we'd set up that we were just starting to do production, and we were reeling from the after effects of the pandemic. We were literally just starting to schedule events again, like our radio show and the things we love to do there. And it seemed like we no sooner started making plans than on July 28th, 2022, early in the morning, about 2 o'clock in the morning, we received an incredible amount of rain in about a 2-hour period of time, which completely destroyed all of our work, our facility, our town, millions of dollars worth of damage, dozens of lives were lost. Knott County was actually one of the hardest hit in the whole flood event. It really fell hard. And this actually, what you're looking at here is a picture of the Troublesome Creek Stringed Instrument Company factory the morning of. And of course, you can see the water has gone down a lot right there. In truth, the water was much deeper on the inside of the building than it was on the outside of the building because of the rain coming down off of the mountain. So it filled up like an aquarium and just wrecked all of our stuff. A lot of work in progress materials. I could run down the list, but it took millions of dollars to put it back just like it was, so we could try to catch up with where we were. Now this is the guys back to work here. This is a fairly recent photo. Jeremy Haney, our mandolin maker, is over there to the right, and our newest employee, well, I guess he's not the new, well, anyway, our newest dulcimer maker is Thomas Sloan, and he's there making a traditional Ed Thomas dulcimer. So and then of course the guys are scattered around the shop there, but it cost a fortune to put all that back. And we were thinking that we were out of the woods as far as the weather went. And then we had an event, as you know, last month, which wrecked. This is the basement level of the Bolin building, our school of Luthery, the Appalachian School of Luthery. And that's several $1,000s worth of walnut lumber and some workbenches and tools, equipment that today are actually being pulled out of the back door there and pressure washed out by the creek. We have a group of disaster recovery workers who are cleaning and drying that stuff that in our new basement that we had just restored. And this is actually, you know, that picture there is Thomas Sloan and James. They're out at the Holly Hill Mall out at Malley, just on the outside of town. They had just gone into a store and parked there, and that was as far as they got with that car. And he's not driven it a foot since. And they reassured me that they could swim. They said they could. But this is the night of the most recent flood back in February. Someone took this picture at twilight, and in the middle of the picture, the building with the lights on there is the Troublesome Creek String Instrument Company, because the guys were in there working to mitigate damage, which I can talk about a little bit. We really were very, very gun shy of this flood when it came, and the guys were prepared. I think they did a real good job of defending our property against the flood. But the main thing is, yeah, despite our losses, the flood did not get up as high this time, or the water did not move as violently as it did back in 2022. That was a truly special circumstance. I sincerely hope it is a 1,000-year flood. We don't want to ever see anything like that happen to us or anyone else's town in our life.
Doug, I know that we could do a whole webinar, I think, just on your all's experience in the first flood, in between, and then now, which we may do. But you just mentioned that your guys did a great job defending the factory. Can you talk a little bit about what that looked like? What were the steps that you all had planned to put in place, and what did they actually do when you became aware that a major flood event was coming again?
Well, for starts, they moved everything up off of the creek level spaces. The lower offices, they pulled equipment and all of our instruments in process, finished instruments especially. They took those instruments up to the second floor. We're fortunate we have a very high second floor, and anything we could think of that would be irreparably damaged by the intrusion of floodwater, we just simply raised up as high as we could get it. We didn't want to go crazy because we really couldn't imagine that even a bad rain event was going to do the kind of damage that we had in 2022. But we took a bunch of instruments upstairs, set sensitive things at least on high shelves. And then because we've done a lot of analysis about the dynamic of the 2022 flood, and a lot of people think that, you know, it's just a creek getting out of its banks and that's all there was to it. It was a lot more complicated than that. A lot of the damage that was done was from water coming down off the mountains in such a violent way that it was knocking buildings off of their foundations. We're sensitive to that, and that we have drains, a drain system that's built into the original property that has to take water down to the creek, or else it will come in the back door of the building. We have a big, essentially a garage door that faces the mountain behind the factory, and we have a double door. Well, we have several, but one that we're most concerned about is really close to where the water comes down off of the mountain. So we knew we've actually had damage in there since the first flood. Just a bad thunderstorm had brought rain in, and it had done $10,000 worth of damage to the brand new red oak floors before we even moved into the building. The contractor still had it, and we had to figure out what was going on there. So long story short, they kept the big grates in the parking lot. They cleared them and kept them clear. They blocked the doors with an improvised sort of a dam that they built out of anti-fatigue mats that they just went into the factory and grabbed. And then we scooted up concrete blocks against the anti-fatigue mats to form a gasket that would keep water from coming in the double doors, essentially sandbagging the flood out, but in a way that really sealed the doors, not just stopping a current of water, but just keeping water from coming in under the doors. Because if you think about it, a lot of buildings made of rock or stone, they won't take water through the rock or stone. They can turn water back if you seal up the doors and do not allow that water to come in. We saw several buildings that survived the first flood simply because the doors were sealed really well, and there may have been 3 or 4 feet of water in the parking lot, but much less inside of the building. So you don't have to have hermetically entry doors, but keep some stuff handy that you can close those doors off with.
Right.
And
Very ingenious.
Well, they say that necessity, that panic fuels a lot of inventiveness, we've discovered.
Indeed. Well, I think that I've been taking notes, and I've already, identified a couple of things I think that you all have done that are great mindsets for any type of crisis, because we'll move into that in a moment. But the last question I have for you, Doug, is kind of what, it's my belief that readiness and preparedness is as much a mindset and kind of a way of operating as it is anything that's written down or thought of ahead of time. Have there been kind of changes in the culture or the mindset of just how you all in the factory work and think on a day-to-day basis that you think make you more resilient now than you were when you were hit in 2022?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, it's changed my whole crew because you know how that band of brothers mentality forms when people have gone off to war and have come back together. There's a special bond between individuals that's hard to explain. My team rose to the challenge of cleaning up our factory and our school and our town, but they never flinched. They never got discouraged and said, well, I quit because this is just too hard or something like that. These are people that, of course, with our program, are people who came through recovery. And then when you said, well, now we're going to have to be, disaster recovery workers, they never flinched. It's like, all right, that's what we'll do. Do we have enough shovels? And never looked back until we finished the restoration of the buildings, which took us almost up to now, to get back in the places where we were before. But it strengthened the community more than I would have ever imagined. And that goes for people outside of our crew too. The town, they really cherished everything that they had left after the flood, and they were thankful for the things that they've been brought through.
Well, thank you, Doug. I hate to cut you off, but I know we've got a limited amount of time, but this is,
Definitely.
I mean, what a great context setting for what we're doing. Thank you for sharing your story. I think it's hard to ask people to relive these kind of awful events over and over. So I really appreciate you doing that. And I think we will follow up with a lengthier opportunity to talk with you. So
It'll be
thank
my
you.
pleasure.
Thanks. Well, that's a segue into the fact that although they were prepared for and experienced, unfortunately, a water or weather event, um, you never really know what can happen. You should have situational awareness, obviously, as Doug and his crew did, about where water rise and waterfall might hit them, but things can happen to you from any angle. So I know that we have individual artists and creatives on the call today. So I'm just going to propose to you a couple of different kinds of scenarios in a flood and just ask you to think about if you would be ready if one of these happens to you. So the first one is you're an artist in residence. You and your small dance ensemble, you've just shown up at a new school for a new gig. Suddenly the fire alarm goes off. You don't know where the emergency exits are. You don't see your fellow company members. Do you know what you would do? Or here's another example. You're out of state at a festival. It's one of your main income sources for the year. But while you're out of state, you receive a text alert that the house that you rent, where you live and where you keep your home office is on fire. Do you know what you would do, how you would protect your livelihood? A third, and all of these, by the way, are somewhat based on actual events. Your music trio has rented a city-owned theater space. You've got 3 performances, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. However, it's an unexpected snowfall occurs, and without your knowledge, the city manager says the facility is closed, events are canceled. You weren't part of that agreement or any part of the public relations around it. How would you handle that? And a fourth potential eventuality. You click on an e-invite, looks friendly, but it's a bad link. And you unfortunately download a virus which corrupts all the files on your laptop. What would you do? So just a little, things to ponder as we talk through this today. One of the things that I find readiness planning can offer is peace of mind. That actually thinking through scenarios like that and knowing what you would do, what are some steps, rather than making you more anxious, it can actually give you peace of mind because you're not fretting all the time. You've actually thought through what are some of the things that you would take to make you safer, to make you more resilient, to make you come out better on the other side. So just a little bit of background. Again, Tamara noted that I'm with NCAPER in the opening. NCAPER was formed in 2006 because we really saw nationally funders, state and local arts councils, that there was this huge gap in the response and recovery safety net for the arts in across the country, particularly for individual artists. So that's why NCAPER was formed. And we work in partnership with a lot of other organizations, and we kind of divvy up the work in these kinds of ways. We do a lot of advocacy, networking, information sharing. We work closely with our friends at Performing Arts Readiness, which despite their name, I would say 90% of the resources on their website, their trainings and webinars and resources really can serve any discipline at all. Craft Emergency Relief Fund does a lot of planning tools and resources and grants for studio and for craft artists. Then we also are a partner with D-Plan and Arts Ready. This is the online planning tool that was created back in the late aughts and was just refurbished and relaunched about 2 years ago. And if you are a small to mid-sized organization, it walks you through actual developing your readiness plan online. We work with the Heritage Emergency National Task Force, which is a partnership of the Smithsonian and FEMA, and does a lot of work, particularly if a cultural institution has damage after an event, whether it's paper or textiles or photos. They have conservators and preservation experts who can help make sure that our material heritage is maintained. And then the FAIC, the Foundation for Advancement in Conservation, and their networks of alliances for response, of which Kern is one now. Just a quick snapshot of how we all work together and divvy up the work. A couple of definitions that I like to use. What really is readiness? One way to define it is to always be in a posture to be resilient and prepared for whatever crisis or emergency may arise. And mitigation, as Doug talked about, is that process of identifying potential risks and figuring out how to reduce or eliminate that risk. So if you mitigate, you reduce your risk, and then if you're ready, even if something that you had not anticipated comes your way, you've kind of built those muscles and built those plans in your head so that you can respond quickly and come through stronger. And just a reminder that readiness planning can really help you prepare for all kinds of crises, because there are the natural ones, but there are also human-caused crises. There are accidental ones, and there are intentional. There are people who want to do mischief, like whoever sent you that virus on the computer. And then there are forecast events that you can plan for, and those that just happen out of left field and are unforeseen. So we advocate for all readiness, all hazards planning, so that really any plan that you have to protect yourself and your resources and your practice is going to be able to respond to any of these types of crises. So I'm just going to be upfront and say, I know that there are lots of reasons not to spend the time to do this. These are common myths or common stories that I hear that have might have a kernel of truth, but I really want to say, you know, this is definitely for you. Even if you think you're not really part of the creative economy, I would hazard, and I think the Kentucky Arts Council would say, no, you actually are. Thanks to our friends at AIR Collaborative, they put together this graphic of all of the different things that the creative economy includes, which includes cultural heritage, history, festivals and events, toys and games, music, story, art, culinary arts. All of these things are really part of the creative economy. And it's huge. These are figures are 4 years old, but according to BEA, creatives and culture are this huge business, and second only to retail. So if you don't protect your own practice, then that portion of the creatives and culture creative economy is going to be lost or compromised. Another thing that I have heard said is, you know, I don't earn my living through my art or craft, so that it really isn't that important to protect. Well, I would disagree. I would say that if you make something, it's important to protect it, whether it's something that you do full-time or part-time, even if you just do it, whether you do it for economic benefit or just for your own, quality of life. If you are doing it for your emotional or mental health, it's worth protecting. If you're doing it to carry on a tradition in your community, it's worth protecting. I have heard this a lot. I haven't been as damaged as my friends or neighbors or colleagues. I didn't get that bad, or I wasn't hurt as much as I was in the last disaster. That may be true, but that doesn't mean that you aren't deserving of care and attention and resources. NCAPER often deals with these twin realities, which is that the arts and culture sector are under-resourced to begin with. So you're vulnerable to crises from the get-go. But you are the ones that communities look to immediately for healing, for support, for emotional health, for processing trauma. So if you all aren't healthy and able to do your work, the rest of us aren't going to be healthy as quickly. So please don't compare yourself. And one of NCAPER's jobs is to make sure that the resources that you need are there for you. This is not like a zero-sum game. And lastly, I don't have the time or money to do readiness planning. Yes, there are some things that will take some time and money to do. But as I asked Doug to talk about, a lot of it is just a mindset. It's just thinking about this so that the way you do your everyday work is in a way that is going to make you stronger. And in fact, many of the things that I'm going to recommend you do, I hope and I believe will make your working life easier, whether you have a crisis or not. So what exactly is readiness planning? It's an intentional decision-making process about what you'll do and how you will do it. Building those muscles, because when you're in the middle of a crisis, you're not thinking as creatively or as rationally as you would in a normal blue sky situation. But a couple of principles that I recommend you where we begin. A, no guilt. Whatever you have done or haven't done doesn't matter. Start where you are. There's no point in saying, oh, I should have done this, I could have done that. Start where you are, and let's just take one step at a time. Another principle is redundancy and dispersion, which basically means have a lot of copies of stuff and have them in different places. We'll talk about that, distributing information, whether it's on paper, in different people's brains, online, in the cloud. And lastly is you need to prioritize for you. I'm about to lay out 4 basic steps that you can go through at your own pace to build kind of your individual readiness plan. But you need to, every situation is different, every practice is different, every discipline is different, every studio is different. So you need to prioritize for you and make your own best decisions. So just when you think about this idea of all hazards readiness, any crisis cuts you off from a critical resource or function, whether it's a flood, a power outage, your partner is ill, whatever it is, a crisis cuts you off from a critical resource or function. That might be something to do with your programming, the creation process, making your work, selling your work. It could be cutting you off from key people, whether those are customers or vendors, suppliers, facilities. Whether you have a vast professional facility like Doug has talked about, or just a small home studio, or the place where you go to perform your work. If that's cut off from you, that can be a crisis. If you lose access to your IT and data, any kind of communications cut off can be a crisis. Finances, your assets, collections, your inventory, and then your community. Again, if any of these are interrupted or disrupted in any way, you want to be able to have a plan B with how to restart them or how to maintain or have a secondary channel to keep these operations going. So here are a couple of readiness planning steps. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. We will make these slides available to you and a recording of this. But basically, and one way that is makes this a little bit more palatable is to get together with a couple of artist colleagues and do this together, just to have an evening, have some cheese and wine and do this work together. Step 1, list your assets, just literally write them down. Step 2 is to assess your risks and vulnerabilities. Step 3 is to protect them, doing that mitigation and minimizing risks. And step 4 is actually creating your readiness plan. So here are some steps that you can do under each of these to move yourself towards better resilience. When you sit down to list your assets, and this can just, be on a laptop or on a piece of paper, think about what your assets are in one column. So you have your physical space and all of the physical items that are in that. Your records, your materials and supplies, your finished work, your technology, anything that is in your space that inspires you or informs you or is background or educational materials. Events, are there places where you need to be because that's where you sell your work or that is where you perform, or that's where you need to be seen. And finally, relationships. Who are the people, whether they are artistic collaborators or vendors and suppliers, or those who consume your work, collectors, schools, festivals who hire you, just, kind of go down and list all of those assets that make your work possible. The second thing that you want to do is assess your practices, risks, and vulnerabilities. You can mitigate against some of your highest risks. So for instance, for some of you, that might be location specific. If you're located right on Troublesome Creek, then that's something to be aware of and to plan for. If you are in an urban space where there is high foot traffic, might be great visibility, but also presents risks in terms of security. That might be a location-specific risk. You also want to think about value. Are there things that are of highest value for you? For instance, there may be one festival, which is where you generally make 70 to 80% of your annual income. That's a place where you might really want to focus your attention. Or if you have particular work, Doug talked about taking the instruments that are of the most value or are the most unique and moving them up to the highest point. Think about things in terms of which are your most valuable. And if you have a particular, your medium might lend itself to risk. I have in calmer times done avocational work in glass, and I've always said it's really interesting that I work in a medium that can both cut me and burn me at the same time. But think about what are the risks in your particular medium that you can mitigate, not only for yourself, but others who might be in your space. Again, thinking about all hazards planning. If you lose access to your studio, it really doesn't matter whether that is because floodwaters have risen or because the person from who you rent it has found black mold and it's not safe for you to go in and they won't let you access it. It doesn't matter. The point is you can't get to anything in your studio. So what you need to have in place that if you can't physically get into your studio, you put into place, you can keep your practice going. And I don't want to minimize the fact that we have overlapping crises happening right now. There are the urgent ones, but there are also these slow ones. Economic volatility that's going on, the effects of climate change, the potential, we're still catching up from the last pandemic, the possibility of another one. So thinking about those as well as the ones that are right kind of immediately in your face. Step 3, you've listed your assets, you've listed your risks. Step 3 is to figure out how can you mitigate and protect those assets as much as possible. So you want to compare those and figure out where are the biggest risks and what are the places where I can reduce my exposure. One obvious step is to have redundant paper and digital records. For instance, my contact list of important people, I work from home, so I have one in my desk, I have one in the cloud, and I have one in the glove compartment of my car. So if I need to evacuate, I still have that contact list. I don't always trust that my phone's going to have everything in it, so I want phone numbers and stuff written down. I used to work with an artist, Craig Nutt, in Tennessee, and he took all of his key records, and he had one in his studio, one somewhere else in Nashville, and one he mailed to his mother out of state, so that if something big happened in his home region, there was still somebody who was going to have information that he could get to, and it was protected in a remote location. You want to document your physical assets. This can just be taking an hour and going around your studio with your smartphone and just recording everything, having evidence and documentation of what you are in possession of, what its condition is, and then making sure that you insure that and that you are building some rainy day fund for yourself. You want to think about your digital health. Again, that idea of not, accidentally downloading a virus. I find it really teeth clenching to have to lay out money for a new computer every 5 years. But the truth is they become obsolete. I have to pay that subscription for McAfee every year, making sure that my data is protected because I'm an independent contractor. Those are the things that you just need to think about budgeting in and planning for. Making sure you know what your emergency and disaster options are. That example of having your rental canceled at the city theater. If you are a performing artist, you're going to be signing contracts that have force majeure clauses. Make sure that you understand them. Make sure that you understand how you can be protected and you can negotiate. Contracts are a place to start a conversation. You can always ask for something different to make sure that both parties are protected and their risk is minimized if for some reason your event needs to be canceled. And making sure that you have power and communication backups. Do you have a surge protector and a UPS, an uninterrupted power source for key equipment in your location? If you need to suddenly evacuate your studio, do you have a safe shutdown plan so that your power and communications are shut off safely and nothing's going to fry while you're gone? Just some thoughts about minimizing your risks. And step 4 is creating that readiness plan. Again, some of this should be written down. What's your communications plan? Who will you reach out to? Who are your key contacts that you would need to be able to grab this list and go if you needed to evacuate as part of your go bag? Both a physical and a digital go bag is something that if you need to bug out, you have got things like, a copy of your ID, some cash. If you need to grab your backup hard drive and throw all that, key documents and get out, but have that information with you. You want to think about needing to shelter in place. If there's a crisis, it's not always about evacuating. Sometimes you might need to stay in location for a while. Last year here outside of Atlanta, we had a chemical fire. And the smoke was toxic. And so there were large areas and neighborhoods that were told to just stay inside. Are you prepared to be able to communicate and keep in touch with the outside world if you suddenly aren't supposed to leave for 48 hours? Again, having that shutdown plan. How can you safely shut down? If you do need to ready your studio, if you have time before an event, to move those instruments, to move those assets. To communicate with people and say, I'm going to be gone for 48 hours. This is where you can find me. Those kinds of things. Thinking about readiness on the road. If you do travel to festivals or if you are a performing artist and you are a gig worker, you want to make sure that you are thinking ahead. My big soapbox is when you do go to a new site, the first thing you should ask for, because they're not likely to offer it, is a safety and security orientation. Where is the safety equipment? If you are on stage and something happens, who makes the call about if the event is suspended? Or, is the stage manager your go-to person? So making sure that wherever you are on the road, you're prepared. Protecting your legacy. Even if you are an early to mid-career creative, you are creating a legacy and you want to make sure that your work is maintained over time. So thinking about archiving your work, thinking about if you are getting into that mature phase of your career, do you have some sort of succession plan or way to pass your assets on? Training yourself and others. Again, this is kind of muscle memory that you want to build into. So even just doing some mental exercises with yourself. Some of the kinds of scenarios that I shared at the beginning of this webinar, just give yourself a thought exercise once a week. If you work with others, if you work with a company, or you have others, maybe you're in a shared studio space, just kind of brainstorm and say, okay, what would we do if this happened? If this scenario occurred, what would be my first, second, and third steps that I would take? And finally, committing to annual updates. Things change. You acquire new assets. You create new work. You get rid of stuff. There are new contacts that you have to have. So once a year, take a little bit of time to just go through this plan, look again at your list of assets and risks. What has changed? What do you need to update? What might you be able to let go of because it's no longer relevant or it's not as big an issue? So that has been a whirlwind tour through readiness planning. But I don't want to just leave you there. I want to make sure that you have access to planning resources in addition to today's webinar. Craft Emergency Relief Fund has a wonderful studio protector. Again, it was designed for craft artists, but I find that there are many elements of it that are useful for any kind of studio artist. And they also have some wonderful free online artist career resources that dig into things such as protecting your legacy and creating a safe studio. NCAPER has created a similar, it's a 2-pager preparedness tips for performing and literary artists that kind of riff off of the Studio Protector, but look at the needs of performing and literary artists. D-Plan Arts Ready is, again, an online tool for if you have it's not necessarily going to serve your needs if you're an individual artist, but if you are a small ensemble or a small artist-run organization, it's a really great way. It runs you through this risk assessment firstly, and then all of these kind of action steps to move you towards readiness. And you can prioritize it in your own way and move at your own pace. And with my NIFA hat on, over the last couple of years, we've created 2 blogs on preparedness that delves into what I've talked about today in a much deeper way. One was focused on visual artists in 2023 and one on performing artists just last September. So when we distribute these slides, these links will be available if you want to get into those in more depth. Also, again, just be aware that there are recovery resources out there if you are an artist that has experienced a crisis. These are tools and emergency grants. There are a number of emergency grants that are ongoing, as well as the ones that we know pop up after individual disasters. So please, again, don't diminish your need. Don't discount your validity. If something has happened to you and you need help, please don't be afraid to ask for it. So with that, I'm going to pause and ask Tamara if there are questions that have come into the chat or any experiences that people want to share. I always learn in these kinds of events what other people have done, and then I'm able to share it with others in the future. So happy to hear from any of you on the Zoom.
We haven't received any questions yet, but I wonder if people have some stories to share, similar to Doug's or very different. You know, we had the tornadoes in Western Kentucky a couple of years ago, right before the big 1,000-year flood in Eastern Kentucky. Doug, do you have anything more you wanted to say about the floods in Heinemann?
Well, yeah, I mean, last time around, we had a new thing happen, which fortunately didn't result in anything bad, but we actually had a gas furnace that was running when the water came in, and it exploded. And it kind of made a mess. We didn't lose the building or anything like that, but we were kind of shocked because we had built a system that allowed the floodwater to leave. You know, it was pumping it out of there. Wonderful industrial quality sump pump essentially underneath our school. And it worked great until the power went off. So I guess we should have had a little more money to throw at it and maybe had some sort of a generator system so that we could keep things going. But, you know, these great disasters, they come from outside the box, and you have to think in terms of, well, we've had this disaster. Also, the powers went off, and, you know, situations arise that you'll know the next time you do it, you'll want to do it a little bit differently. And there are some things that you just don't want to imagine that you'll need, but I was just thinking it's worth mentioning to everyone because it may save a life. And from my point of view and in my program, it's front and center, but Narcan is readily available and everyone should have some on their premises. If there are artists or performers involved, or even just civilians, because sometimes people will just drift through and collapse unexpectedly, and then they could be in a life or death situation. And Narcan is a very easy thing to obtain and keep on hand. So I recommend that. If you have enough of a budget, AEDs are great because some of those individual disasters can require that someone be jump started a little bit. It's not basic first aid, but it's the kind of things that make a difference between life and death. And so, I always want to remind people about those things like that. I think of all this when you're talking. Yeah.
There's so much to know. Teresa Webb just posted in the chat that she always gets the director's phone number for outdoor fairs or markets. She said she had to use it not for a weather emergency, but a parent in her booth who lost a child, and they finally found her hiding behind a tree. And Teresa was able to text the organization, text the director so that they could organize a search to find. What a scary thing. There's just so many things. It's like we can't even imagine all the things that can happen, all the things we need to know. Mollie, is there you said you have a meeting coming up in Paducah. Is that right? Did you say Paducah?
Yeah, there's a training. I won't be involved, but my colleague Tom Clareson at Performing Arts Readiness and the folks at UKY Extension Service have put it together. So it is on April 1st. It's full day disaster preparedness for the arts and free registration. And they're encouraging teams because it's so much easier. And I agree with this, that if you have a person or two go to the training, you'll pick up more. And then when you go back home, it's so much easier to institute some of this stuff if you have a colleague in arms to do it with you. So let me drop that information into the chat.
That sounds like a great opportunity. And of course, last summer, UK Arts Admin worked with NCAPER and current Karen and some other groups to put on a preparedness activity, a workshop in Lexington, which was just mind-blowing.
Yeah, there's an incredible resource there with Leah Hamilton. Has a whole arts administration training program on arts emergency management. So you have a real resource there in the state. And I am pulling up the link to that workshop here.
I tried to capture Mollie's links as she went through, but she had so many that I didn't get all of them. Some of them are in the chat, but some of them will be on the PowerPoint presentation that we can send to you later. If you'd like to have it, just let me know.
Well, I'm going to put up my contact information so that if you have any questions or are looking for resources, down to the last slide, please feel free to reach out to us. And if you would like to visit ncaper.org, join our mailing list. We only put out about one email a month. We wait until we have it kind of chock full of resources and information. We would love to keep in touch with you. And again, we are constantly iterating and evolving and learning. So we'd love to hear from people who've been through crises and have things and tips to share that we can then pass on to others with whom we work across the country.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug. We dragged Doug out of his basement where they were working to save materials today. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your stories and your images as well of the two floods that you've gone through here in the last couple of years. And Mollie, as always, Mollie Quinlan-Hayes from NCAPER, she will be your best friend if you need information about emergency preparedness or anything in that realm. I've used her just to ask about funding for artists in emergency situations, and she's always got ideas and advice and can point you in the right direction. Any final words, Molly?
Thank you all. Thank you, Kentucky Arts Council, for putting this together. Thank all of you for being here. It's just such a privilege to talk with artists and creatives. And again, we're here to help you do your work. So if there's any way that we can be supportive or of assistance, please call on us.
And just a reminder that we do have more of these Creative Industry Summit series coming up. The next one you might be interested in is in April. On the 4th, it's our taxes for artists and creatives. You can register online on our website at artscouncil.ky.gov. We have more coming up. Please keep checking back, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks so much for joining us.